Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be talking and looking at some of the either available or still unavailable legendaries available for two classes, Paladins as well as Druids. Paladins and Druids are going through quite a lot of changes, and in this patch 9.1 with this build update, those two classes received quite a bit of work. Now for Druids, now you actually have something testable. For Paladins, a lot of these legendaries are still unconfirmed, but it looks like there's some internal balancing going on with buffs as well as nerfs happening over at Blizzard right now. Even though Paladins can't really test their Legos, I still want to take a look at some of the different effects that are internally planned for Paladins and let you guys know my thoughts, whether these buffs are looking good, whether these legendaries are looking bad, and what Blizzard could do to maybe fix some of the legendaries going forward before they come out. Anyway, let's get a look at the Legos in this video. Gonna take a look at Paladins first, and Paladin's ability of Ashen Hollow is a very spectacularly strong ability. It does a ton of damage. Every enemy caught with an Ashen Hollow is just going to be suffering a very painful time. It's super strong. This ability just, slaps. It's a strong covenant that's proven itself in the raid environment for Cassanathria for all three specs, providing raid utility, but also it creates some very powerful damage output, even allowing Holy Paladins to act like a 4 DPS inside of Mythic Pluses. I think the Venthyr Covenant is pretty strong for Paladins, however the 4-minute cooldown is a little bit iffy. You don't get to use it often. So the legendary is going to be Radiant Embers. Ashen Hollow's duration is increased by 50%. If you leave its area, its cooldown is reduced by up to 50% proportional to its remaining duration. Now, I don't think Paladins will be able to drop Ashen, walk out of it, and shave off its cooldown. I think it's going to be one of those situations where the longer you are outside of Ashen, the faster its cooldown will decay, which could make this ability a little bit better. Hard to tell how strong this legendary will be, but at least this legendary solves a problem with the Ashen. It's powerful, but it's kind of stuck to one place. So if for whatever reason you're in there, you are greeted with more of it. But if for whatever reason you gotta move, you might be able to use its cooldown more often. Definitely an interesting take that at least tries to add something new to the ability. Then we have the Kyrian Paladin, and this covenant is actually one of the more popular covenants for all three specs of Paladins. The Divine Toll ability is quite huge. It allows you to either cast Holy Shock, Avenger Shield, or Judgment on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. Which will not only do the damage, it'll also apply the debuff of Judgment, for example, for Red, and generate holy power for each target that you hit. So it's quite a good covenant ability overall. Divine Resonance is the legendary planned. Every 10 seconds after casting Divine Toll, you cast it again at now 20% effectiveness instead of 60, so quite a nerf there. This effect lasts 30 seconds. So when you hit Divine Toll, 10 seconds after, a weaker version of Divine Toll will fly out, which not only generates you resources, which is huge, you can also work off your conduit, which can buff up the single target output of this ability, and also this ability just does damage, good damage on its own. So this will happen after 10 seconds once, 10 seconds after twice, and then 10 seconds after 3 times, so you'll get 3 extra uses of Divine Toll with Divine Resonance Legendary. Again, still too early to tell whether any of these legendaries for the Covenant abilities will be stronger, and in the early sims, a lot of them are suggested that they're probably not going to be that good or even slightly behind some of the more popular legendaries that classes use right now. But I could totally imagine a Paladin, maybe in Mythic Plus, is using this quite often. I mean, the amount of resources the this legendary will generate is huge. The amount of extra healing and damage value it can generate is massive. The silence effect for prod, the judgment effect for red, it could also be quite huge. And the way that it interacts with already some of the existing systems for, let's say, Holy Pala, again, could have some potential. I think this one has probably the most potential. The ability is really good, and this legendary just makes the ability even better. Then for the Fae Paladin, which isn't a common playstyle at all, I personally do enjoy it because it kind of mimics the classic Paladin playstyle with so many different blessings that you provide for your allies, and with so many different blessings that the blessing of summer, winter, spring, and fall offer. It's a really unique playstyle that I'm continuing to explore. Plus a Paladin, a class that's kind of not really movement inspired, have a Fae ability super enjoyable there too. But the legendary for this one is Seasons of Plenty. Every time you use Blessing of Summer and Blessing of Winter, you trigger the effect of Solstice, which provides your party 5% extra haste and 10% cooldown reduction for 10 seconds. I love the idea of cooldown reduction in a variety of different classes. I think it's really cool to have some kind of CDR, which can sometimes swing certain fights and I always thought it was a unique mechanic that only a few specs had, and being able to bring it to more playstyles I think isn't a bad idea. And also being able to provide to your party, again, not super amazing in raids maybe, but in dungeons 5% extra haste could be pretty okay. And the fact that it could trigger on 2 of the blessings out of the 4 is also not a terrible draw. The ability itself just falls short. It's not the problem with the legendary, but the legendary does seem really weak because the Night Fae ability itself is also kind of weak. You see, with the Kyrian and the Venthyr, the ability is really solid, and the legendary decides to solve an issue of the Lego or try to add extra mechanic to it, which exercises on some of the strengths of that Covenant ability. The Night Fae ability doesn't really have a strength in particular. It buffs an ally or yourself with a kind of an okayish buff. It's not super amazing, fantastic. It's nowhere near like the buff of the Priest and the Night Fae playstyle with the fairies they have, because that's huge buff, very similar to that of a PI. It's not the problem with the legendary, it's just the legendary seems so much weaker because of the way that the Night Fae ability is set up, and I really think Blizzard needs to go back to the drawing board, rethink the Night Fae ability for Paladin, and if that can become stronger, then this legendary will become actually pretty decent. Then we have the Necrolord legendary for Paladins and the Paladin ability of Vanquish's Hammer. So the way that Vanquish's Hammer works, it's kind of like that Kyrian ability with the Toll, but you throw out this weird Judgment ability that will empower your next Templar's Verdict to also have a Divine Storm. Or if you're a Holy Paladin, your Word of Glory will also have a Light of Dawn happen. Or if you're Protection, it'll empower your Word of Glory to also let you slam that shield for Shield of the Righteous extra armor. So it's like a combo Lego that lets you single target do also an AoE ability, which I think has some uses in Mythic Pluses. And the legendary is Duty Bound Gavel, where Vanquish's Hammer gains an extra charge and it lets you proc the ability that it's supposed to like give you an extra off twice, which can be kind of okay somewhat, but again, I think just like Night Fae, the ability of the actual Vanquish's Hammer is just really weak. Now, it's a really cool idea behind Vanquish's Hammer, this Wombo combo, and it might work really well in certain Mythic Plus situations with specific setups. Maybe for Holy Paladin, it could provide some decent tank healing because there would be a lot of healing to provide it to your Beacon of Light target. So it could be kind of bursty in very specific situations, but generally, the ability itself just does not compete against the other Covenants at all. And again, I think that's one of the situations where Blizzard would really need to go back to the drawing board of Vanquish's Hammer and kind of rethink the ability. Because the idea of this legendary is kind of cool, but if only this ability itself just gave you quite a bit of huge value of damage, healing, or I guess tankiness, then I think it would be stronger. But in its current state, I just don't really think it's competitive. Then we have the Druid, and with Druids we actually have a legendary we could test right here in Oribos. We're going to start off with the Kyrian Druid, which gives you this symbiosis-like ability from Mists of Pandaria, but not quite. You form a bond with an ally, and every 1 minute you may empower this bond, where your damage is going to empower your ally. Their damage or healing is going to empower you, or if they're a tank, there's going to be some absorption healing. So it's pretty smart with how the ability works. The legendary allows you an extra effect, where Kindred Affinity is going to you and your Kindred Spirit each gain 5% of secondary stat based off their healer covenant. This bonus is doubled when the bond is empowered, so it's hard to tell how good this will be because it just provides secondary stats. 5% of stats that you choose, depending on who you bind with, can be decent. 5% for a tank, for example, could be good, but when you use the ability, it becomes 10%, or maybe 5% as a boomy, and it's 10% whenever you're bursting. Same thing for crit as a feral. I just don't really know. As of right now on the PTR servers, it doesn't actually craft you this legendary. Instead, every time you try to make a Kyrian legendary, it makes you the new Necro legendary. So it's not like we can really test, but on paper, it doesn't seem like a bad Lego. Would you replace some of the strongest legendaries for Druids? Very unlikely. Would you even run this as a secondary Lego? It's hard to tell. If, let's say, for some reason we got two Legos, and I guess maybe the next patch, this one will still be really hard to justify. It's not terrible on paper, and if secondary stats ever become really, really good, it could maybe be an okay legendary if you want to play multiple specs of a character. If you haven't just switch fights all the time and you kind of want to make one good Lego that's decent for everything as a Kyrian. But, I don't know, really hard to tell just how good this will be. It's cool on paper, but it's hard to see the value. Then we have the Necrolord legendary adjustment, where it'll actually be a little bit better by the looks of it. So they made it where Adaptive Swarm now has a 60% chance to split into 2 swarms every time it jumps instead of just 1. So as a druid, let's say I put swarm on myself, the swarm will be with 3 stacks. Every time it jumps, it loses a stack. But as I get in combat with these targets, it has a 60% chance to double up to 2 multiple enemies. So let's see if it does it. And it does. So you can see 2 enemies now have these 2 stacks. And when it jumps back to me, I guess it has a chance to give the stack to, let's say, the Thunderbluff Protector, technically. Potentially. Oh, it came to me and it came to this druid right here. So I can actually reapply that stack, so I have 4 stacks. So then it has a chance to jump to enemies with 3 stacks. It's pretty cool. Now, I like this change to make this ability a little bit more consistent by going from a 30% chance for it to multiply or duplicate to a 60% chance. It definitely makes it a little bit more consistent, a little bit better in the long run. But again, look at this. 3 enemies all swarmed up. It looks awesome. It looks wicked cool. And I have a stack here, 2 stacks. I have 2 stacks right here. It could be potentially sweet. However, I just don't really know how it's going to be good for DPS. Now, Blizzard's been trying to make this covenant a little bit better for DPS, and I love playing the Bleed Kitty that I'm messing with right now, but it's just hard to tell just how good this is going to be. I feel like this is a really good covenant and potentially decent legendary for like a Restoration Druid inside of a Mythic Plus, where you're able to put up these swarms on allies so you can get more value from a healing over time, and damage to enemies so you can put Moonfire and Sunfire to a bunch of enemies and kind of deal with them a little bit easier and contribute to damage in some small way. Like, it could be really cool in that situation. On a boss fight, it's mute. But in dungeon situation with multiple enemies, multiple allies you get benefits from, it could be pretty sweet. I like the general idea of this legendary, but I cannot imagine a single situation where it could be best unless you're a particular Restoration Druid focusing on doing a bit of healing, bit of damage in a Mythic Plus scenario. And that's really about all I could see it. It's a really cool idea, and seeing all these swarms are very sweet, but I just wish there was more potential to it, and I wish this swarm ability itself was just a hair stronger overall. Because look, I mean, this guy got a buff, this guy got a buff, it's a swarm on the enemy, it's a bunch of swarms happening at the same time. That could be a lot of healing, a lot of damage on top of it. I just don't really see how it would benefit a DPS, but definitely can see how it benefits a healer, for example. And for druids, it looks like while my paladin can change covenants, my druid cannot go back to Venthyr, cannot go back to Night Fae on PTR, cannot even swap to Necrolord as of right now. So my druid is kind of just stuck all over the place for the time being. Interesting. So at least we could talk about some of the different legendaries. So Sinful Hysteria is the legendary that was added for druids, and at the time it just wasn't all that strong, but looks like Blizzard added an extra tidbit to it. So the ability for druids that are Venthyr is called Ravenous Frenzy. During Ravenous Frenzy, every ability you press increases the damage you do, the healing you do, as well as your haste by set amount per stack. Whether it is you spamming thrashes and swipes or shreds, or putting rejuves on everybody, or Moonfire spamming the enemies, or just even standing there and pressing Dispel on yourself over and over and over. As long as you're pressing an ability, you'll get the stacks of Ravenous Frenzy, which increases the damage, healing, as well as your haste. So the more you do, the faster you get, and then it just kind of builds and builds and builds and builds and builds for quite a while. It's a 3-minute and it lines up with just about every other druid's 3-minute big abilities. So Sinful Hysteria is a legendary, where originally it had it where Ravenous Frenzy, every time Ravenous Frenzy stack is applied, its duration was increased by 0.2 seconds. And that's all it was. That by itself, and again, a lot of these Covenant legendaries don't really seem all that strong by themselves. Maybe if we ever get a 2 legendary setup, we might be able to use some of those Legos in a 2 legendary setup, but by itself, most Legos are not looking that strong, at least in Sims, early Sims. But also, this one was going to be the weakest of all of them, and already a lot of them are not even going to be played, at least that's what it seems right now. So then Blizzard added an extra effect. Now, additionally, you gain stacks of Sinful Hysteria equal to Ravenous Frenzy stack after it ends. So it looks like after your Ravenous Frenzy ends, you gain Sinful Hysteria. And Sinful Hysteria reads, your damage and healing is increased by 2%, haste by 1%, stacking lasts for 5 seconds. So if the duration stacks, as well as the damage, healing, and the haste stacks, then it's almost like you're prolonging a second version of Ravenous Frenzy after your Ravenous Frenzy has ended. which could be pretty decent. I mean, you're basically getting double the uptime of Ravenous Frenzy with Sinful Hysteria. That could maybe be okay, unless you're supposed to gain Sinful Hysteria while your Ravenous Frenzy happens, but it says here equal to Ravenous Frenzy after it ends. So after Ravenous Frenzy ends, I believe. Again, maybe Blizzard will change this in the future, but this could be okay. Actually, I think this is actually a pretty decent change for this Lego in order to maybe make it a little bit stronger. I don't think it's going to make it better, but it is going to be at least somewhat more considered. I don't really know. I don't want to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think about Sinful Hysteria? Do you think you could potentially make Venthyr Druid a viable thing at some point? And finally, for Night Fae, it's going to be the Convoke the Spirits Legendary Celestial Spirits. The cooldown on duration of Convoke the Spirits is reduced by 50%. Convoke the Spirits now has an increased chance to use an exceptional spell or ability. So I would guess for druids it'll be like more bites, more star surges, like any of the abilities to do more damage, more healing. I don't really know what it would be for bear druids. Maybe it's a frenzied regen, so more self-sustain, or maybe more thrashes. Who knows? Or maybe it's like Iron Fur. Who really knows what they mean by that? But it means that you get a minute CD on your Convoke the Spirits, but also you get a 2-second channel instead of a 4-second channel, which in some cases could actually make it a little bit better. Convoke is one of the strongest Covenant abilities overall of all the classes out there. For druids, it's just a ton of abilities getting used. I mean, the game basically is getting played for you when you're using Convoke. However, there's always been a weird thing with Convoke where it was a little desync with your Celestial Alignment or your Berserk or any of the other 3-minute big button abilities for druids. So making it a 1-minute CD means you have more burst phases, like mini burst phases of this ability, but also it will end up with your Celestial Alignment or Berserk. Then you'll get to use Convoke by itself. Then you'll get to use it second time, and then on third, it'll line back up with your cooldowns. So potentially could really be good. Just in the raw nature of just how strong Convoke the Spirits is, and especially with like Balance Druid, for example, losing one of the better legendaries becoming less good, I think this Celestial Spirits one could be really strong for at least 3 out of 4 specs of druids. For Bear Druid, I don't really know how good it's going to be, unless you're trying to play the DPS Bear Druid where you go into bear form and you're trying to Star Surge the boss before the pull and you're trying to contribute as much damage as you can. Maybe that could be good there. But for Restoration Druids, that could easier contribute damage, or I guess have more bursts of healing for your allies, which could be good on its own. For Feral, that's more opportunities to do damage, so it would synergize pretty well on a lot of your abilities, really. Then for Boomies, again, more opportunities for you to get more value. And we haven't even talked about PvP value, where let's say you stun somebody with a bash, you pop enough Convoke, they'll panic, trinket, interrupt it, but they don't know that the next bash, you'll have Convoke back up. And as long as you're fairly lucky with your Convoke and the abilities it throws out, it should be mostly guarantee you against PvPers, I would imagine. But Celestial Spirits doesn't seem like a bad Lego. And in fact, while all the other one Legos for Covenant Legendary alterations don't really seem all that strong, I feel like I just call it a gut feeling. I think this one could actually get some play. I think this one could get some serious play in there because of how strong Convoke is as an ability. It is super valuable, and literally 99% of druids are Fae just because of Convoke the Spirits as tanks, as resto, as literally every spec in the game. And it's just kind of nuts because this just is a really good ability. So this legendary lets you use the ability more often, granted at a shorter duration, but it lines up better with your cooldowns. So overall, I think it's a win-win in general. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about all these legendary changes and legendary updates? Which ones do you think are looking good, and which ones are not so looking good? Hoping that Blizzard actually adds some sort of an NPC so we can change our covenants and are able to test things out a lot more readily, because basically having it reliant off of my live characters is pretty annoying, not gonna lie. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.